The Red-Headed League. I called upon my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, one day in autumn last year, and found him in deep conversation with a stout, florid-faced man, elderly gentleman with fiery red hair. With an apology for my intrusion, I was about to withdraw when Holmes pulled me abruptly into the room and closed the door behind me. "You could not have possibly come at a better time, my dear Watson," he said cordially. "I was afraid that you were engaged." "So I am. Very much so." "Then I can wait in the next room." "Not at all. This gentleman, Mr. Watson, has been my partner and helper in many of the most successful cases, and I have no doubt that he will be the utmost use to me and yours also." The stout gentleman half rose from his chair and gave a bob in greeting, with a quick little questioning glance from his small, fat, encircled eyes. "Try the settee," said Holmes, relapsing with his armchair and putting his fingertips together, as was his custom when in judicial moods. "I know, my dear Watson, that you share my love of all that is bizarre and outside the conventions of humdrum routine of everyday life. You have shown your relish for it, an enthusiasm which has prompted me to chronicle and, if you will excuse my saying so, somewhat embellish so many of my own little adventures. Your cases have been, indeed, of greatest interest to me, I ordered. You will remember that I remarked that the other day, just before we went to a very simple problem presented by Miss Mary Sutherland, at the strange effects of extraordinary combinations we must go into life itself, which is always far more daring than any effort of the imagination. Proposition I took the liberty in doubting. You did, Doctor, but none the less you must come round to my view, for otherwise I shall keep on piling fact upon facts on you until your reason breaks down under them, and acknowledges me to be in the right. Now, Mr. Jabez Wilson here has been good enough to call upon me this morning, and to begin a narrative which promises to be one of the most singular I have listened to for some time. You have heard me remark that the strangest and most unique things are often connected, not with the larger, but with the smaller crimes, and occasionally, indeed, where there is room for doubt whether any positive crime has been committed. As far as I have heard, it is impossible for me to say whether the present case is an instance of crime or not. But, of course, the event is certainly among the most singular that I have ever listened to. Perhaps, Mr. Wilson, you would arrive with great kindness to recommence your narrative. I ask that you do merely because my friend Dr. Watson has not heard the opening part, but also because the peculiar nature of the story makes me anxious to have every possible detail from your lips. As a rule, when I have heard some slight indication of the course of events, I am able to guide myself by the thousands of other similar cases which occur to my memory. At the present instance, I am forced to admit that the facts are, to the best of my belief, unique. The portly client puffed out his chest with the appearance of some little pride, and pulled a dirty and wrinkled newspaper from his inside pocket of his greatcoat. As he glanced down to the advertisement column, with his head thrust forward and the paper flattened out upon his knee, I took a good look at the man and endeavored in any fashion my companion to read the indications which might be presented by his dress and appearance. I did not gain very much, however, but my inspection. Our visitor bore every mark of being an average, commonplace British tradesman, obese, pompous, and slow. He wore rather baggy grey shepherd's check trousers, and a not overly clean black frock coat unbuttoned in the front, and a drab waistcoat with a heavy based Albert chain, and a square, piercing but bit of metal dangling down from an ornament. A frayed top hat and a faded brown overcoat with a wrinkled velvet collar lay upon the chair beside him. Although, look as I would, there was nothing remarkable about the man save his blazing red hair, and the expression of extreme chagrin and discontent upon his features. Sherlock's quick eye took in my occupation, and he shook his head with a smile as he noticed my questioning glances. Beyond the obvious facts that he has at some time done manual labor, that he takes snuff, that he is a Freemason, and that he has been to China, and he has done a considerable amount of writing lately, I can deduce nothing else. Mr. Jabez Wilson started up from his chair, with his forlorn finger upon the paper, but his eyes upon my companion. "How in good fortune did you know all that, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "How did you know, for example, that I did my manual labor? It's true as gospel, for I began as a ship's carpenter." "Your hands, my dear sir. Your right hand is quite larger than your left. You have worked with it, and the muscles are far more developed." "Then, then the snuffmen and the fairy masonry?" "I won't insult your intelligence by how I know that, especially as, rather against strict rules of your order, you use an arc and compass breastpin." Of course, I forgot that. But the writing? What else can be indicated by the right cuff so very shiny for 5 inches, and the left one with so smooth a patch near the elbow where you rest upon the desk? Well, but China? The fish you have tattooed immediately upon your right wrist could have only have been done in China. I have made a small study of tattoo marks and found even contributed to the literature of the subject. That trick of staining the fish's scales a delicate pink is quite particular for China. While, in addition, I see a Chinese coin hanging from your waist chain, and the matter comes even more simple. Mr. Jabez Wilson laughed heavily. "Well, never," he said. "I thought at first that you had done something clever, but I see that you're nothing at all, after all." "I begin to think, Watson," said Holmes, "that I make a mistake of explaining. Omne ignitum pro magnifico, you know, and my poor little reputation, such as it is, will suffer shipwreck if I am so candid. Can you not find advertisement, Mr. Wilson?" "Yes, I've got it now," he answered with a thick red finger pointed halfway down the column. "Here it is. This is what began it all. You must read it for yourself, sir." I took the paper from him and read as follows. "To the Red-Headed League. On the account of the behest of the late Ezekiah Hopkins of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, USA, there is now another vacancy upon which entitles a member of the League to a salary of £4 a week for purely nominal services. Red-headed men who are sound in body and mind, and above the age of 21 years are eligible. Apply in person on Monday, at 11 o'clock, to Duncan Ross at the offices of the League, 7 Pope Street, Fleet Street." "What on earth does it mean, man?" I ejaculated after I'd read twice over the extraordinary announcements. Holmes chuckled and wiggled in his chair, in his habits when in high spirits. "It is a little off the beaten track, isn't it?" he said. "And now, Mr. Wilson, off you go at scratch and tell us all about yourself, your household, and the effect which this advertisement has upon your fortunes. You will make first a note, Doctor, of the paper and the date." "It is the Morning Chronicle of April 27th, 1890, just 2 months ago." "Very good. Now, Mr. Wilson?" "Well, it is just as I've been telling you, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said Jabez Wilson, mopping his forehead. "I have a small pawnbroker's business in Colbert Square near the city. It's not a large affair, and of late years it's not been done more than just giving me a living. I used to be able to keep 2 assistants, but now I only keep 1. And I would have a job to pay him, but is willing to come for half wages, so as to learn the business." And what is the name of this obliging youth? asked Sherlock Holmes. His name is Vincent Spaulding, and he's not much of a youth either. It's hard to say his age. I should not wish a smart assistant, Mr. Holmes. And I know very well that he could better himself and earn twice what I can offer to give him. But after all, if he is satisfied, why should I put any ideas in his head? Why indeed? You seem most fortunate in having an employee who comes under the full price market. It is not common experience among employers in this age, and I don't know that your assistance is not as remarkable of your advertisements. Oh, he has his faults too, said Mr. Wilson. Never was such a fellow for photography, snapping away with his camera when he ought to be improving his mind, and then driving down to the little cellar like a rabbit into its hole to develop his pictures. That is his main fault, but on the whole, he's a good worker, and there's no vice in him. He's still with you, then, I presume? Oh, yes, sir. He and his girl is 14, who does a bit of simple cooking and keeps his place clean. That's all I have in the house, for I'm a widower and never had any family. We live very quietly, sir, the three of us, and we do keep a roof over our heads and pay our debts, if we do nothing more. The first thing that puts us out is that advertisement, Spaulding. If he came down to the building just this day, 8 weeks, with the very paper in his hand, and he says, I wish to the Lord Mr. Wilson that I was a red-headed man. Why is that? I asked. Why, says he, there's another vacancy in the League of Red-Headed Men, and it's worth quite a little fortune to any man who gets it. I understand that there are more vacancies than there are men, so that the trustees are at their wits' end on what to do with the money. If my hair would only change color, there's a nice little crib all ready for me to step into. Why, what is it then? I asked. You see, Mr. Holmes, I'm a very stay-at-home man, and as my business came to me instead of having to go out for it, I was often weeks on end without putting my foot over the doormat. And that way I didn't know much of what was going on outside, and I was always glad for a bit of news. Have you never heard of the League of Red-Headed Men? He asked, with his eyes open. Never. Why, I wonder at that. You're eligible yourself for one of the vacancies. And what are they worth? I asked. Oh, merely a couple of hundred a year, but the work is slight, and if need not interfere with much of a man's other occupations. Well, you can easily think that's what you may and pick up my ears, for the business has not been over good for some years, and an extra couple of hundred would have been very handy. Tell me about it, I said. Well, he said, showing me the advertisement, you can see for yourself that the League has a vacancy, and there is the address where you would apply particulars. As far as I can make out, the League was founded by an American millionaire, Isaiah Hopkins, who was very particular about his ways, when he was himself red-headed, and he had a great sympathy for all red-headed men. So when he died, it was found that he had left his enormous fortune in the hands of the trustees, with the instructions to apply to the interests to the provided easy berths of men whose red hair was of that color. From all I hear, it is splendid pay, and very little to do. But, I said, there would be millions of red-haired men who would apply. Not so many as you would think, he answered. You see, it really is confined to Londoners, and to grown men. This American had started from London when he was young, and wanted to do the old towns a good turn. Then again, I've heard it is no use of your applying if your hair is light red or dark red, or anything but red, bright, fiery, blazing red. Now, if you care to apply, Mr. Wilson, you could just walk in, but perhaps it would hardly be worth your while to put yourself out of the way for the sake of a few £100. Now, it is in fact, gentlemen, that you see in your younger selves that my hair is very rich and red full tint, so that it seemed to me that there was no competition in the matter that stood the chance of any man that I had ever met. Vincent Spaulding seemed to know so much about it that I thought he might prove useful, so I just ordered him to put up the shutters for the day and come right away with me. He was very willing to have a holiday, so we shut up the business and started off for the address that was given in the advertisement. I never hope to see such a sight as that again, Mr. Holmes. From north, south, east, and west, every man who had a shade of red in his hair had tramped into the city to answer the advertisement. Fleet Street was chocked with red-headed folk, and Pope's Court looked like a coasters for Orange Borough. I should not have been there so many of the whole country as were brought together by a single advertisement. Every shade of color they saw straw, lemon, orange, brick, Irish setter, liver, gray. But as Spaulding said, there were not many who had real vivid flame colored tints. When I saw how many were waiting, I would have given it up in despair, but Spaulding would not hear of it. How he did it, I could not imagine, but he pushed and pulled and butted until he got me through this crowd, and right up to the steps which led into the office. There was a double stream upon the stairs, some going up in hope, coming down and dejected. But we were wedged in as well as we could, and soon found ourselves in the office. Your experience has been most entertaining, remarked Holmes, as the client paused and reflected upon the memory with a huge bunch of stuff. Pray, continue your very interesting statements. There was nothing in the office but a couple of wooden chairs and a deal table, behind which sat a small man with a head that was even redder than mine. He said a few words to each candidate as he came up, and when he always managed to find some fault in them which would disqualify them. Getting a vacancy did not seem to be much of a very easy matter, after all. However, when our turn came, the little man was much more favorable to me than he had any of the others. He closed the door as we entered, so that we might have a private word with us. This is Mr. Jarvis Wilson, said my assistant, and he is willing to fill the vacancy in the league. He is admirably suited for it, the other answered. He has every requirement. I cannot recall when I have seen anything so fine. He took a step forward and cocked his head from one side to the other, and then gazed at my hair until I felt quite bashful. Then suddenly he plunged forward, wrung my hand, and congratulated me warmly on my success. It would be injustice to hesitate, said he. You will, however, I am sure, excuse me for taking an obvious precaution. With that, he seized my hair with both his hands and tugged until he pulled in pain. There was water in your eyes, he said as he relieved me. I perceive that it is all as it should be. We have to be careful, for we have twice been deceived by wigs and one by paint. I could tell you the tales of cobbler's wax which would disgust you in the very human nature. He stepped over to the window and shouted through it at the top of his voice that the vacancy had been filled. A groan of disappointment came up from below, and the folk all trooped away in different directions until there was not a red head to be seen, except my own and that of the manager. My name, said he, is Mr. Duncan Ross, and I am myself one of the pensioners upon the fund left by our noble benefactor. Are you a married man, Mr. Wilson? Have you a family? I answered that I had not. His face fell immediately. Dear me, he said gravely, that is very serious indeed. I am sorry to hear you say that. The fund was, of course, for the propagation and spread of the redheads as well as their maintenance. It is exceedingly unfortunate that you should be a bachelor. My face lengthened at this, Mr. Holmes, for I thought that I was not to have a vacancy after all. But after thinking it over a few minutes, he said that it would be all right. In the case of another, he said, the objection might be fatal, but we must stretch the point to the favor of the man with such a head of hair as yours. When shall you be able to enter upon your new duties? Well, it is a little awkward, for I have a business already, said I. Oh, never mind that, Mr. Wilson, said Vincent Spaulding. I shall be able to look after that for you. What would the hours be? I asked. 10 to 2. Now, a pawnbroker's business is mostly done in the evening, Mr. Holmes, especially Thursday and Friday evening, which is just before payday. It would suit me very well to earn a little in the mornings. Besides, I knew that my assistant was a good man and that he would be able to see anything that was done. That would suit me very well, said I. And the pay? It is £4 a week. And the work? It is purely nominal. What do you call purely nominal? Well, you have to be in the office or at least in the building the whole time. If you leave, you forfeit your whole position forever. The will is very clear upon that point. You don't comply with the conditions if you budge from the office during that time. It's only 4 hours a day. I should not think of leaving, said I. No excuse will avail, said Mr. Duncan Ross. Neither sickness nor business nor anything else. There you must stay, or you lose your billet. And the work is to copy out the Encyclopedia Britannica. There is the first volume of it on the press. You must find your own ink, pens, and blotting paper, but we provide this table and chair. Will you be ready tomorrow? Certainly, I answered. Then goodbye, Mr. Jabez Wilson, and let me congratulate you once more upon the important position which you have been fortunate enough to gain. He bowed me out of the room, and I went home with my assistant, hardly knowing what to say or to do, so I was pleased at my own good fortune. Well, I thought of the matter all day, and by evening I was in low spirits again, for I had quite persuaded myself that the whole affair must be some great hoax or fraud. Though what its object might be I could not imagine. I seemed altogether past belief that anyone could make out such a will, or that they should pay such a sum for doing anything so simple as copying out the Encyclopedia Britannica. Vincent Spaulding did what he could to cheer me up, but by bedtime I was reasoning myself out of the whole thing. However, in the morning I determined to have a look at it anyhow. So I bought a penny bottle of ink, and with a quill pen, and 7 sheets of foolscap paper, and started off to the Pope's courts. Well, to my surprise and delight, everything was as right as possible. The table was set out ready for me, and Mr. Duncan Ross was there to see that I had got fairly to work. He started me off upon the letter A, and then he left me. But he would drop in from time to time to see that all was right with me. By 2 o'clock he bade me good day, complimented me on the amount that I had written, and locked the door of the office after me. This went on day after day, Mr. Holmes, and on Saturday the manager came in and planked down another 4 golden sovereigns for my week's work. It was the same next week, and the same the week after. Every morning I was there at 10, every afternoon I left at 2. By degrees, Mr. Duncan Ross took to coming in only once in the morning, and then, after a time, he did not come in at all. Still, of course, I never dared to leave the room for an instant, for I was not sure when he might come in, and the billet was such a good one, and suited me so well, that I would not risk the loss of it. 8 weeks passed away like this, and I had written about abbots and archery and armor and architecture and Attica, and hoped with diligence that I might get onto the bees before very long. It cost me something in fool scrap, and I had pretty nearly filled a shelf with my writings. And then suddenly the whole business came to an end. To an end? Yes, sir. I know later than this morning. I went to my work as usual at 10 o'clock, but the door was shut and locked, with a little square of cardboard hammered on the middle of the panel of the tack. Here it is, and you can read it yourself. He held up a white piece of cardboard with the size of a sheet of notepaper. It read in this fashion: The Red-Headed League is dissolved. October 9th, 1890. Sherlock Holmes and I surveyed the curt announcement and a rueful face behind it, until the comical side of the affair was so completely overtopped every other consideration that we both burst out in a roar of laughter. I cannot see that there's anything funny, cried our client, flushing up to the roots of his flaming head. If you can do nothing better than laugh at me, I could go elsewhere. No, no, cried Holmes, shoving him back into the chair from which he had risen. I really wouldn't miss your case for the world. It is most refreshingly unusual. But there is, if you will excuse my saying so, something just a little funny about it. Pray, what steps did you take when you found the card upon the door? I was staggered, sir. I did not know what to do. Then I called at the offices around, and none of them seemed to know anything about it. Finally, I went to the landlord, who had an accountant living on the ground floor, and asked him what he could tell me what had happened to the Red-Headed League. He said that he had never heard of such a body. Then I asked him about Mr. Duncan Ross was. He answered that the name was new to him. Well, I said, the gentleman at number 4. What? The red-headed man? Yes. Oh, said he. His name was William Morse. He was a solicitor and was using my room as a temporary convenience until new premises were ready. He moved out yesterday. Where could I find him? Oh, that's his new offices. He did tell me the address. 17 King Edward Street, near St. Paul's. I started off at once, Mr. Holmes, and when I got to the address, it was the manufacturer of old artificial kneecaps. And no one in it had ever heard of Mr. Williams Morris or Mr. Duncan Ross. And what did you do then? Asked Holmes. I went home to Saxon Square and took the advice of my assistants. But he could not help me in any way. He could only say that if I wanted, I should hear the post. But that was not quite good enough, Mr. Holmes. I did not wish to lose such a place without a struggle. So, as I had heard that you were good enough to give advice to poor folk who were in need of it, I came right away to you. And you did very wisely, said Holmes. Your case is an exceedingly remarkable one, and I shall be happy to look into it. From what you have told me, I think that it might be possible that the graver issues hang on it might first appear. Grave enough, said Mr. Jeffries Wilson. Why, I have lost £4 a week. As far as you are personally concerned, remarked Holmes, I do not see that you have any grievance against the Extraordinary League. On the contrary, you are, as I understand, richer by some £30, to say nothing of the minute knowledge which you have gained on every subject which comes under the letter A. You have lost nothing by them. Oh, sir, but I want to find out about them, who they are, and what their object was in playing a prank, if it was a prank upon me. It was a pretty expensive joke for them, and it cost them £32. We shall endeavour to clear up these points for you, and first, one or two questions, Mr. Wilson. This assistant of yours who called your attention to the advertisement, how long had he been with you? About a month, then. How did he come? In answer to an advertisement. Was he the only applicant? No, I had a dozen. Why did you pick him? Because he was handy and would come cheap. At half wages, in fact. Yes. What is he like, this Vincent Spaulding? Small, stone-built, very quick in his ways. No hair on his face, though he's not short on 30. Has a white splash of acid on his forehead. Holmes sat up in his chair in considerable excitement. I thought as much, said he. Have you ever observed that his ears are pierced for earrings? Yes, sir. He told me that a gypsy had done it for him when he was a lad. Said Holmes, sinking back in thought. He is still with you? Oh, yes, sir. I only have just left him. And has your business been attended in your absence? Nothing to complain of, sir. There's never much to do in the morning. That will do, Mr. Wilson. I shall be happy to give you an opinion upon the subject of the course a day or two. Today is Saturday, and I hope that by Monday we may come to a conclusion. Well, Watson, said Holmes said Holmes when our visitor had all left, what do you make of it? I make nothing of it all, I answered flatly. It is a most mysterious business. As a rule, said Holmes, the most bizarre thing is the least mysterious it proves to be. It is your commonplace, featureless crimes which are really puzzling, just as a commonplace face is the most difficult to identify. But I must be prompt over the matter. What are you going to do, then? I asked. To smoke, he said. It is quite a three-pipe problem, and I beg that you will speak to me for 50 minutes. He curled himself up in the chair, and his thin knees drawn up and a hawk-like nose. And there he sat with his eyes closed and his clay-black pipe thrusting out like a bill of some strange bird. I had come to the conclusion that he had dropped asleep, and indeed was nodding myself, when he suddenly sprang out of his chair with the gesture of a man who had made up his mind and put his pipe down upon the mantelpiece. Sarset plays at the St. James Hall this afternoon, he remarked. What do you think, Watson? Could your patient spare you a few moments? I have absolutely nothing to do today. My practice is never very absorbing. Then put on your hat and come. I am going through the city first, and we can have some lunch on the way. I observe that there is a good deal of German music on the program, which is rather more to my taste than Italian or French, which is introspective, and I want to introspect. Come along. We travelled by the Underground as far as the Aldersgate, and took a short walk to Colt Saxon Square, the scene of a singularly story which had listened in the morning. It was a porky little shabby genteel place, where 4 lines of dingy two-storied brick houses looked out on a small railed-in enclosure, with a lawn of the weedy grass and a few clumps of faded laurel bushes made a hard fight against the smoke-laden and uncongenial atmosphere. There are 3 gilt balls and a brown board with Jabby's Wilson in white letters upon the corner house announced the place where our red-headed client carried on his business. Sherlock Holmes stopped in front of it with his head on one side and looked it over, with his eyes shining brightly between the puckered lids. Then he walked slowly up on the street and then down again on the corner, still looking keenly at all the houses. Finally he returned to the pawnbroker's, and having thumped vigorously upon the pavement with his stick 2 or 3 times, he went up to the door and knocked on it. It was instantly opened by a bright-looking, clean-shaven young fellow, who asked him to step in. Thank you, said Holmes. I only wish to ask you how you will go from here to Strahd. Third right, fourth left, answered the assistant promptly, closing the door. Smart fellow, that, observed Holmes as we walked away. He is, in my judgment, the fourth smartest man in London, and for daring I am not sure that he has not a claim to be third. I have known something of him before. Evidently, said I. Mr. Wilson's assistant counts for a good deal of the mystery in the Red-Headed League. I am sure that you inquired your way merely in order that you might see him. Not him. What then? The knees of his trousers. And what did you see? What I expected to see. Why did you beat the pavement? My dear doctor, this is a time for observation, not for talk. We are spies in an enemy's country. We know something of Saxe-Coburg Square. Let us now explore the parts which lie behind it. The road in which we found ourselves as we turned around the corner of some retired Coxswain Square presented a great contrast to it in the front of the picture it does in the back. It was one of the main arteries which conveyed the traffic of the city to the north and west. The roadway was blocked with an immense stream of commerce flowing in a double tide, inward and outward, while the footpaths were black with the hurrying swarm of pedestrians. It was difficult to realize we looked at a line of fine shops and stately business presences that really butted against one upon the other, faded, and a stagnant square which had been acquitted. Let me see, said Holmes, standing in the corner of the glancing along the line. I should like just to remember the order of the houses here. It is a hobby of mine to have an exact knowledge of London. There is Mortimer's, the tobacconist, the little newspaper shop, the Coburg branch of the City and Suburban Bank, the vegetarian restaurant, and McFarland's carriage building depot. That carries us straight on to the other block. And now, Doctor, we've done our work, so it's time we had some play. A sandwich and a cup of coffee, and then off to the violin land, where all the sweetness and delicacy of the harmony, and there are no red-headed clients to vex us with their conundrums. My friend was an enthusiastic musician, being himself not only a very capable performer, but a composer of no ordinary merit. All the afternoon he sat in the stalls wrapped in the most perfect happiness, gently waving his long and thin fingers in time with the music, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were unlike those of Holmes, the sleuth-hound. Holmes, the restless, keen-witted, and ready-handed criminal agent, as it was possible to conceive. In his singular character, the dual nature alternately asserted itself, and his extreme exactness and astuteness represented, as I have often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood which occasionally predominated in him. The swing of his nature took from him extreme languor and devouring energy, and, as I well knew, he was never truly formidable as when, for days on end, he had been lounging in his armchair and mid his improvisations and black-letter editions. Then it was that the lust of the chase would suddenly come upon him, and that his brilliant reasoning power would rise to the level of intuition, until those who were unacquainted with his methods would look askance at him on the man whose knowledge was not that of other mortals. When I saw him that afternoon so enwrapped in that music at St. John's Hall, I felt that an evil time might be coming upon those whom he had set himself to hunt down. You want to go home, no doubt, Doctor? He remarked as we emerged. Yes, it would be as well. And I have some business to do which will take some hours. This business in Coburg Square is serious. Why serious? A considerable crime is in its contemplation. I have every reason to believe that we shall be in time to stop it. But today, being Saturday, rather complicates matters. I shall want your help tonight. At what time? 10 will be early enough. I shall be at Baker Street at 10. Very well, and say, Doctor, there may be some little danger, so kindly put your army revolver in your pocket. He waved his hand and turned on his heel and disappeared into an instant among the crowd. I trust that I am not more dense than my neighbor, but I was always oppressed a sense of my own stupidity in my dealings with Sherlock Holmes. Here I had heard what he had heard. I had seen what he had seen, and yet his words, it was evident that he saw clearly not only what had happened, but what was about to happen, while to me the whole business was something complicated and grotesque. As I drove home to my house in Kensington, I thought over it all. From the extraordinary story of the red-headed copier in the Encyclopedia Britannica down to the visits of Saxe Common Square. The ominous words which he had parted with me. What was this nocturnal expedition, and why should I be armed? Where were we going, and what were we to do? I had a hint from Holmes that his smooth-faced pawnbroker's assistant was a formidable man, a man who might play a deep game. I tried to puzzle it out, but gave it up in despair and set the matter aside until night should bring up an explanation. It was 9:15 when I started from home and made my way across to the park, and though Oxford Street's to Baker Street. Two hansoms were standing at the door, and as I entered the passage I heard the sound of voices from above. On entering this room I found Holmes in animated conversation with two men, one of whom I recognized as Peter Jones, an official police agent, and the other was a long, thin, sad-faced man with a very shiny hat and oppressively respectable frock coat. "Ah, our party is complete," said Holmes, buttoning up his pea-coat and taking his heavy hunting cap from the rack. "Watson, I think you know Mr. Jones of Scotland Yard. Let me introduce you to Mr. Merryweather, who is to be our companion in tonight's adventure." "We're hunting in couples again, Doctor, you see," said Jones in a consequential way. "Our friend here is a wonderful man for starting a chase. All he wants is an old dog to help him to do the running down." "I hope a wild goose chase may not prove to be the end of our chase," observed Mr. Merryweather gloomily. Yes, you may place considerable confidence in Mr. Holmes, sir," said the police agent loftily. "He has his own little methods, which are, if he won't mind my saying, a little too theoretical and fantastic, but he has the makings of a detective in him. But it is not too much to say that once or twice, as in the business of the Sholto murder and the Augur treasure, that he has been more nearly correct than the official force." "Oh, if you say so, Mr. Jones, it is all right," said the stranger to my indifference. "Still, I confess that I miss my rubber. It is the first Saturday night for 77 years that I have not had my rubber." "I think you will find," said Sherlock Holmes, "that you will play for a higher stake tonight than you have ever done yet, and that the play will be more exciting. For you, Mr. Merryweather, the stake will be some £30,000, and for you, Jones, it will be a man upon whom you wish to lay your hands." "John Clay, the murderer, thief, smasher, and forger. He's a young man, Mr. Merryweather, and he is at the head of his profession, and I would rather have my bracelets on him than any criminal in London. He's a remarkable man, is young John Clay. His grandfather was a royal duke, and he himself has been to Eton and Oxford. His brain is as cunning as his fingers, and though we meet signs of him at every turn, We never know where to find the man himself. He'll crack a crib in Scotland one week, raising money to build an orphanage in Cornwall the next. I've been on his track for years and have never set eyes on him yet. I hope that I might have the pleasure of introducing you tonight. I've had one or two little turns with Mr. John Clay, and I agree with you that he is the head of his profession. It is past 10, however, and quite time that we would get started. So if you two will take the first hansom, Watson and I will follow the second. Sherlock Holmes was not communicative during the long drive, and lay back in the cab, humming the tunes which he had heard the afternoon. We rattled through the endless labyrinth of gaslit streets until we emerged in Farthington Street. We are close there now, my friend remarked. This fellow Merriweather is a bank director. I'm personally interested in the matter. I thought it would be well to have Jones with us also. He's not a bad fellow, though an absolute imbecile in his profession. He has one positive virtue. He is as brave as a bulldog and as tenacious as a lobster if he gets his claws upon anyone. Here we are, and there they are waiting for us. We had reached the same crowded thoroughfare in which we had found ourselves in the morning. Our cabs were dismissed, and following the guidance of Mr. Merriweather, we passed down a narrow passage and through a side door, which he opened for us. Within there was a small corridor, and each ended in a very massive iron gate. This also was opened, and led down a flight of winding stone steps, which terminated at another formidable gate. Mr. Merriweather stopped to light a lantern, and then conducted us down a dark, earth-smelling passage, and so, after opening a third door into the huge vault or cellar, which was piled all around with crates and massive boxes. You are not very valuable from above, Holmes remarked as he held up his lantern and gazed about him. No, you from below, said Mr. Merriweather, striking his stick upon the flags which lined the floor. Why, dear me, it sounds quite hollow, he remarked, looking up in surprise. I must really ask you to be more quiet, said Holmes severely. You have already perilled the whole success of our expedition. Might I beg that you would have the goodness to sit down upon those boxes and not interfere? The soul Mr. Merriweather perched himself on the crate, with a very injured expression on his face, while Holmes fell upon his knees upon the floor, and with the lantern and his magnifying lens began to examine minutely the cracks between the stones. A few seconds sufficed to satisfy him, and he sprang to his feet and put his glass in his pocket. We have at least an hour before us, he remarked, for they can hardly take any steps until the good pawnbroker is safely in bed. Then they will not lose a minute, for the sooner they do their work, the longer time they have for their escape. We are at present, Doctor, as no doubt you have divined, in the cellar of the city branch of one of the principal London banks. Mr. Merriweather is the chairman of the directors, and he will explain to you that there are reasons why the more daring criminals of London should take a considerable interest in the cellar at present. Is it our French gold? Whispered the director. We have had several warnings that an attempt have been made upon it. Your French gold? Yes, we had an occasion some months ago to strengthen our resources and borrowed that for the purpose of 30,000 Napoleons for the Bank of France. It has become known that we have never had occasion to unpack the money, and that is still lying in crates in our cellar. The crate upon which I sat contains 2,000 Napoleons packed between layers of lead foil. A reserve of bullion is much larger at present than is usually kept in a single branch office, and the directors have the misgivings upon the subject. Which is very well justified, observed Holmes. And now it is time that we arranged our little plans. I expect that within an hour matters will come to a head. In the meantime, Mr. Warrior there, We must put the screen over the dark lantern. And sit in the dark. I'm afraid so. I had brought a pack of cards in my pocket, and thought that if we were a partie carré, we might have our rubber after all. But I see that the enemy's preparations have gone so far that we cannot risk the presence of a light. And, first of all, we must choose our positions. These are daring men, and though we shall take them at a disadvantage, they may do us some harm unless we are careful. I shall stand behind this crate, and do you conceal yourselves behind those. Then, when a flash of light upon them, close in swiftly. If the fire, Watson, have no compunction about shooting them down. I placed my revolver cocked upon the top of the wooden crate behind which I was crouched. Holmes shot the slide across the front of his lantern and left us in pitch darkness. Such an absolute darkness as I had never before experienced. The smell of hot metal remained to assure us that the light was still there, ready to flash out at a moment's notice. To me, with my nerves worked up in the pitch of expectancy, there was something depressing and subduing about the sudden gloom, and in all the cold air the vault entered. "They have but one retreat," whispered Holmes. "That is back to the house into Causbrook Square. I hope that you have done what I asked you, Jones." "I have an inspector and 2 officers waiting at the front door." "Then we have stopped up all the holes, and now we must be silent and wait." What a time it seemed! From comparing notes afterwards, it was just but an hour and a quarter, but it appeared to me that the night must have almost gone, and the dawn be breaking above us. My limbs were weary and stiff, for I feared to change my position, yet my nerves were worked up to the highest pitch of tension, and my hearing was so acute that I could not only hear the gentle breathing of my companions, but I could distinguish the deeper, heavier inbreathing of the bulky Jones from the thin, slighting note of the bank director. From my position I could look over the case in the direction of the floor. Suddenly my eyes caught the glint of light. It was the first of the lurid spark on the stone pavement. Then it lengthened out until it became a yellow line, and then without a warning or sound the gash seemed to open, and a hand appeared. A white, almost womanly hand which felt about the center of the area of light. For a minute one more hand, and with its rising fingers protruded from the floor. Then it was withdrawn as suddenly as it appeared, and all was dark again save a single lurid spark which marked the clink between the stones. Its disappearance, however, was but momentary. With a rending, tearing sound of one of the broad white stones turned upon over the side, left a square gaping hole through which streamed the light of a lantern. Over the edge there peeped a clean-cut, boyish face, which looked keenly about, and then, with a hand on the other side of the aperture, drew itself shoulder-high and waist-high until one knee rested upon the ledge. In another instant he stood at the side of the hole and was hauling after him a companion, lithe and small like himself, with a pale face and a broad shock of very red hair. "It's all clear," he whispered. "Have you got the chisel and the bags? Great Scott! Jump, Archie, jump, and I'll swing for it." Sherlock Holmes had sprung out and seized the intruder by the collar. The other dived into the hole, and I heard a sound of rending cloth as Jones clenched over the skirts. The light flashed upon the barrel of a revolver, but Holmes' hunting crop came down upon the man's wrist, and the pistol clanked to the stone floor. "It's no use, John Clay," Holmes said bluntly. "You have no chance at all." "So I see," I answered with the utmost coolness. "I fancy that my pal is all right, though I see you have got his tailcoats." "There are 3 men waiting for him at the door," said Holmes. "Oh, indeed. seem to have done the very thing completely. I must compliment you. And I you, Holmes answered. Your red-headed idea was very new and effective. You'll see your pal again presently, said Jones. I'm quicker at climbing down holes than I am. Just hold out while I fix the debris. I beg that you not touch me with your filthy hands, remarked our prisoner, as handcuffs clattered upon his wrists. You may not be aware, but I have royal blood in my veins. Have the goodness also, when you address me, always as Sir and Please. All right, said Jones with a stare and a sneer. Well, would you please, sir, march upstairs so we can get you into the cab and carry your highness to the police station? That is better, said John Clay serenely. He made a sweeping bow to the three of us and walked quietly off in custody of the detective. Really, Mr. Holmes, said Mr. Merryweather, as we followed them from the cellar, I do not know how the bank can thank or repay you. There's no doubt that you have detected and defeated the most complete manner, one of which most determined attempts at bank robbery that has ever come within my experience. I have had one or two little scores of my own to settle with, Mr. John Clay, said Holmes. I have been at some small expense over the matter, which I shall expect the bank to refund. But beyond that, I am amply repaid by having had an experience which is in many ways unique, and hearing by the very remarkable narrative of the Red-Headed League. You see, Watson, he explained at the very early hours the next morning when we sat over a glass of whiskey and soda in Baker Street, it was perfectly obvious from the first that the only possible object of this rather fanatic business of achievement of the League, than copying the encyclopedia, must be this not overbright pawnbroker out of the way for a number of hours every day. It was a very curious way of managing it, but really, it would have been difficult to suggest a better. The method was no doubt suggested to Clay's ingenious mind by the colour of his accomplice's hair. £4 a week was the lure which must draw him, and what it was to them who were playing for thousands. And they put in the advertisement of one's rogue as a temporary office, the other rogue incites the man to apply for it, and together they managed to secure his absence every morning in a week. From the time that I heard the assistant having come for half wages, it was obvious to me that he had some strong motive for securing the situation. But how could you guess what the motive was? Had there been women in the house, I should have suspected a mere vulgar intrigue. That, however, was out of the question. The man's business was a small one, and there was nothing in his house which could account for such elaborate preparations. And such an expenditure as they were. It must, then, be something out of the house. What could it be? I thought of the assistant's fondness for photography, and his trick of vanishing into the cellar. The cellar. There was the end of this tangled clue. Then I made inquiries to the mysterious assistant, and found that I had to deal with one of the coolest and most daring criminals in London. He was doing something in the cellar, something which took many hours a day for months on end. What could it be once more? I could think of nothing save that he was running a tunnel of some other building. So far as I went to the scene of the action, and surprised you by beating upon the pavement with my stick. I was ascertaining whether the cellar stretched out far behind the building, front or behind. It was not the front. Then it rang a bell. As I hoped, the assistant answered it. We've had some skirmishes, but we had never set eyes upon each other before. I noticed the look on his face. His knees were what I wished to see. You must understand why I remarked by how worn, wrinkled, and stained they were. They spoke of those hours of burrowing, for only remaining point that they were boring for. I walked around the corner and saw that Sidio's stubborn bank abutted to our friend's premises, and felt that I had solved my problem. When you drove home after the concert, I called upon Scotland Yard and upon the chairman of the bank directors, with the result that you had seen. And how could I tell you that they could make their attempt tonight? I asked. Well, when they closed the League offices, that was a sign that they no longer cared for Mr. Jabez Wilson's presence. In other words, they had completed their tunnel. But it was essential that they should use it soon, as it might be discovered, or the bullion might be removed. Saturday would suit them better than any other day, as it would give them 2 days for their escape. For all these reasons, I expected them to come tonight. You reasoned it out beautifully, I exclaimed in feigned admiration. It is so long a chain that every link rings true. It saved me from ennui, he answered, yawning. Alas, I already feel it closing upon me. My life is spent in one long effort to escape from the commonplaces of existence. These little problems help me to do so. And you are the benefactor of the race, said I. He shrugged his shoulders. Well, perhaps after all, it is of some little use. Le homme s'assurund, now s'est trot. As Gustav Flaubert wrote, Dick George Sand.